The lockdown drill had started like any other. Our teacher, Mr. Hayes, calmly instructed us to move to the corner of the room, away from the windows and door. We sat in silence, the room darkened by the drawn blinds. It was supposed to be routine, just another practice, but this time something felt off. I sat with my back against the cool wall, my knees drawn to my chest. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the building's heating system. I glanced at my friend, Lily, sitting next to me. She gave me a reassuring smile, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Minutes ticked by and the silence grew heavier. Suddenly, the school's PA system crackled to life, and Principal Carter's voice, usually so composed, now trembled with fear. "Attention students and staff, this is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Remain in your classrooms, lock the doors, and stay silent." A cold wave of fear washed over me. This was real. Mr. Hayes quickly moved to lock the door and then returned to sit with us. The tension in the room was palpable, everyone straining to hear any sound from the hallway. That's when we heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It echoed through the halls, growing louder and closer. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, but something else, something metallic. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to control my breathing. The tapping stopped right outside our door. We held our breath, the silence pressing down on us. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic. Then, a slow, deliberate knock shattered the quiet. "Mr. Hayes?" a voice called out. It was Principal Carter. Mr. Hayes hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle. "Principal Carter, is it safe?" "Yes, it's safe now. Open the door." But something in the voice didn't seem right. It was flat, devoid of the usual warmth. Mr. Hayes seemed to sense it too. He shook his head and moved away from the door. "Open the door, Mr. Hayes," the voice repeated, more insistent this time. We stayed silent, praying it would go away. The knocking stopped, but the sense of dread remained. Then, without warning, the door handle began to turn, rattling violently. Someone was trying to force their way in. Mr. Hayes grabbed a chair and wedged it under the handle, securing it further. The door rattling stopped and we heard footsteps moving away, the tapping sound fading into the distance. We sat in silence, too scared to speak. Hours seemed to pass, though it was likely only minutes. Finally, the PA system crackled again. "Attention, students and staff. The lockdown is over. You may now resume your normal activities." Mr. Hayes looked at us, his face pale. "Stay here," he whispered. "I'm going to check." He cautiously removed the chair and unlocked the door. The hallway was eerily silent as he stepped out, disappearing from view. We waited, every second stretching into an eternity. A scream shattered the silence, and then the sound of running footsteps. Mr. Hayes burst back into the room, slamming the door shut behind him. "Hide!" he yelled. "Now!" We scrambled to our feet, searching for places to hide. I squeezed myself into a storage closet, peeking through a crack in the door. The classroom door burst open and a figure stepped inside. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by a dark hood. In his hand, he held a long metal rod, its end sharpened to a deadly point. He moved slowly, methodically, checking each hiding place. My heart raced as he approached the closet. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. The door creaked open, and I found myself staring into cold, empty eyes. He reached for me, but before he could grab me, Mr. Hayes tackled him from behind. They struggled, the metal rod clattering to the floor. "Run!" Mr. Hayes shouted. I bolted from my hiding place, Lily right behind me. We sprinted down the hallway, not daring to look back. The sound of the struggle faded as we reached the front doors of the school. Bursting outside, we found a group of police officers, guns drawn. "Help!" I screamed. "He's in there!" The officers rushed inside and we collapsed on the ground, trembling with fear. Minutes later, they emerged with the man in handcuffs. Mr. Hayes followed, a bruise forming on his cheek but otherwise unharmed. "It's over," an officer said. "You're safe now." But as I sat there, the cold night air biting into my skin, I couldn't shake the feeling that safety was just an illusion. The memory of those cold, empty eyes would haunt me forever. a reminder that sometimes the real monsters walk among us. Lockdown drills had become a routine part of school life, so when the alarm sounded during history class, none of us thought much of it. Our teacher, Ms. Morgan, directed us to the designated corner of the room, away from windows and doors. We huddled together, whispering and joking to pass the time. But when Principal Carter's voice came over the PA, it wasn't the usual calm reassurance. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Follow lockdown procedures immediately." A hush fell over the room. The air grew thick with tension. Ms. Morgan quickly locked the door and switched off the lights. We sat in the darkness, listening for any sign of what was happening. Minutes later, the sound of distant gunshots echoed through the halls, followed by panicked screams. My heart pounded as I clutched my phone, fingers trembling. Text messages from friends and family flooded in, but there was no new information, only fear. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a notification from the school's emergency system. "Stay hidden. Suspected intruder on campus. Police en route." Ms. Morgan whispered for us to remain calm, but her voice betrayed her fear. I squeezed my friend Jake's hand, trying to draw strength from his presence. Time crawled by, each second feeling like an hour. Then we heard footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, moving closer. The doorknob rattled, and we all held our breath. The door didn't open, but the footsteps continued down the hall, the sound growing fainter. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. A loud crash echoed from somewhere down the hallway, followed by more screams. The intruder was still out there, and he was getting closer. We stayed huddled together, the darkness amplifying every sound. The occasional ping of a distant text message, the soft sobs of a classmate, and the relentless thudding of my own heartbeat filled my ears. Then the PA system crackled to life again. "Attention, students and staff. This is Officer Daniels with the local police. The building is being secured. If you are safe, stay where you are until further notice." Ms. Morgan breathed a sigh of relief, and some of the tension in the room dissipated. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The footsteps we had heard earlier, they didn't sound like those of someone searching for safety. They sounded like they were searching for something, or someone. Moments later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "He's in the building. Don't trust anyone." I stared at the message, my blood turning to ice. I showed it to Jake, who frowned, and showed it to Ms. Morgan. She read it, her face paling, but before she could say anything, the door burst open. A man dressed in police uniform stood there, his eyes scanning the room. "Everyone stay calm. I'm here to help." Ms. Morgan stepped forward. "Are you Officer Daniels?" He nodded, but something in his eyes made me uneasy. They were too cold, too calculating. I glanced at Jake, who gave me a slight nod. He felt it too. "We need to evacuate," the officer said. "Follow me." We got up reluctantly, filing out of the classroom. As we walked down the hallway, I noticed a slight bulge under the officer's jacket. My heart sank. It wasn't a police radio. It was a gun. I tugged on Ms. Morgan's sleeve, whispering my concerns. She gave me a sharp look, silently urging me to stay quiet. But I couldn't. Something was wrong, and I had to act. As we neared the exit, I took a deep breath and shouted, "He's not a real cop!" The officer whirled around, his face contorted with anger. "What did you say?" Before he could react, Jake tackled him to the ground, the gun skidding across the floor. Chaos erupted as students scattered, running in all directions. I grabbed the gun and pointed it at the imposter, my hands shaking. "Don't move!" I yelled, hoping my voice didn't betray my fear. Real police officers burst through the doors moments later, quickly disarming and apprehending the man. They thanked me for my bravery, but all I felt was numbness. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. We were led outside where our parents waited anxiously. As I hugged my mom, tears streaming down my face, I realized how close we had come to disaster. The imposter had been searching for someone, and thanks to a cryptic text from an unknown savior, we had narrowly escaped a tragic fate. Lockdowns were a regular part of school life, but this one felt different from the start. It was third period, and we were in the middle of a math test when the alarm blared through the halls. Our teacher, Mrs. Allen, instructed us to move to the corner and stay silent. We followed her directions, the usual chatter replaced by an uneasy quiet. As we huddled together, the PA system crackled to life. "Attention, students and staff. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Remain in your classrooms and stay silent." Fear settled over us like a heavy blanket. I exchanged worried glances with my best friend Mia, who sat next to me. Mrs. Allen quickly locked the door and turned off the lights, her face tense. We sat in the dark, straining to hear any sounds from the hallway. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hall, followed by a loud bang. My heart pounded in my chest as the footsteps grew closer. The doorknob rattled and we all held our breath. The door didn't open, but the footsteps continued past our room. A collective sigh of relief swept through us, but it was short-lived. A scream pierced the silence, sending a jolt of terror through me. Mrs. Allen motioned for us to stay quiet. We listened as more footsteps echoed through the hall, followed by muffled voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone was urgent, almost frantic. Minutes later, the PA system crackled again. "Attention, students and staff. This is Officer Harris. The school is being secured. Remain in your classrooms until further notice." Mrs. Allen nodded, visibly relaxing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I glanced at Mia, who gave me a worried look. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Get out now. He's not alone." I showed the message to Mia, her eyes widening in fear. We passed the phone to Mrs. Allen, who read the message and frowned. She whispered, "Stay put," and crept toward the door, peering through the small window. Moments later, the door burst open and two men dressed in black stormed in, guns drawn. "Everyone stay down," one of them shouted. Chaos erupted as students screamed and scrambled for cover. Mrs. Allen tried to shield us, but the men grabbed her, dragging her to the center of the room. "Where is it?" one of them demanded. She shook her head, terrified. "I don't know what you're talking about." One of the men raised his gun, and I knew we had to act. I glanced at Mia and we nodded in silent agreement. While the men were focused on Mrs. Allen, we crawled toward the door. Just as we reached it, the PA system crackled again. "Attention intruders, this is Officer Harris. You are surrounded. Surrender now." The men exchanged panicked glances, momentarily distracted. Seizing the opportunity, Mia and I slipped out of the classroom and ran down the hall, our hearts pounding. We reached the main entrance, where a group of police officers waited. "Help!" I cried. "They have our teacher!" The officers quickly moved in, their guns drawn. Moments later, we heard gunshots and more screams. We waited in terrified silence until the officers emerged, leading the intruders in handcuffs. Mrs. Allen followed, shaken but unharmed. She hugged us tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You saved us," she whispered. The police later explained that the intruders were looking for something hidden in the school, something valuable. Thanks to a warning from an unknown source, we had narrowly escaped a tragic fate. As we stood outside, the cold air biting at our skin, I realized how close we had come to disaster. The events of that day would haunt me forever, a stark reminder that even in the safest places, danger can lurk just around the corner.